Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, show number 464. I'm your host, Loren. Thank you so much for joining us on actually a beautiful day here in the Netherlands. It just cooled back down. It was getting warm again, and I say this in kind of tongue in cheek with all my friends in the States. They're going through being from Florida, obviously, as well, listeners know, lawyer watchers know. It's quite hot in Florida right now, and so we've been kind of looking and going, "Wow, we're going to go back to that middle of summer." So it's been a nice reprieve that it's been wonderful temperatures over here, and it cooled off a little bit today. Unseasonably cold for a few days before we head back to Paris. Before we come, we're going back home to the heat. That being said, that is not the exciting part this week for me, as it was keeping up and informed with what was going on in conferences this week. Of course, HFTP's High Tech, and then of course HSMAI's Commercial Conference. All of it happening in Charlotte. Record-setting attendances for HSMA in particular. They sold out of their 860 allotted seats of attendees. Possibly could have sold hundreds more. That is phenomenal considering back in the day when I was with the board and I actually had to create this. I was one of the early founders of it, and it was like we were happy to have 200. I remember when we were happy to have 150, then we were happy to have 200, then we were happy to have 300. Now 860. Of course, now ROC Revenue Optimization Conference merged with the Digital Marketing Conference that I'm referring to, and to this commercial conference which is a smart move by HSMAI, which has created collaborative for years. And those that know me, for years with HSMAI, being on the board and the council and so forth, did a road trip with wonderful Bonnie Buckheiser, Jen Thiessen, and Fran, and we 33 cities we went to, and we were preaching about the need to break down silos between sales and marketing and revenue management and so forth. And strangely enough, in this week's conversations at the HSMA conference, it's still reflected upon. It's still reflected upon that this is now more the norm. And I think a lot of, as we've talked about in the show many times, the need to consolidate those disciplines, those voices, those personalities of marketing and revenue management and sales. It's still a topic that needs discussing. As much as it seems more normal, the commercial consolidation, which the conference reflects, there's still this segmentation as to how the different disciplines approach perhaps mutual projects, but how do they approach different things? And that's reflected in some of the topics and stuff. So all of this goes to what our topic is today. And we promised last week, because of all the conferences coming on this week, that we would talk a little bit about it. So my topic today is from talking points to action items, translating conference topics. Always conferences are an attempt to give you the validation of why you spend the money to go to the conferences, to be exposed to what is the prevalent thinking, what is the newer ways of doing things, or what will be the future way of doing things, or what's being considered and thought of in a future tense. Now, that has been both successful at times and unfortunately self-destructively redundant for buzzwords and unrealistic prognostications and forecasts and so forth, where I think Tim Peter describes one of the better analogies of it is that we always underestimate the short-term changes compared to long-term changes. And because of that, we always think things are going to happen in a progressive way with more impact now than they were. And let me recite some of the famous buzzwords of time: blockchain, VR. Gosh, there's so many. Anyway, but those give you some sense of the fact that those were just topic points in conferences for many years, which is the bane of trying to talk about future tenses, and nobody knows the future tense. This year in particular, but with a nice twist to it, and I'll explain that. Obviously, the buzzword of today is AI and how AI is to be used. And we have talked about AI on the show. We've talked about its usages in AI and so forth. And the conference was no exception to this. I'm going to focus more on the HSMAI topics today than the High Tech conference, because High Tech has great sessions. They tend to be more reveals as to products and services from those that are participating in it. And I'm not saying that HSMAI isn't, but the focus of high tech is to literally expose new services and techniques and products to the hospitality industry. So it keeps true to its vein. Here is a product person, and this product person is going to talk about what their product does. And usually it's related to the things that are needing to be evolved into, or the attempts of being evolved into new processes and new products and new services for hospitality. So that's more about product and services, which is a very strong reflection on the reality of translating what is being talked about in conferences like HSMAI, the commercial conference, where it's talking about the how rather than the what. So we're going to focus on HSMAI's topics and conference conversations of how to translate their talking points into items that you go back to your hotel full of fun stuff of meeting people and being exposed to new products from high tech and also from vendors and HSMAI, and from thinking differently or thinking about things that you're not thinking about on a daily basis when it comes to the conference topics that when it came on with HSMAI. Again, going back to the core theme of AI, it's prevalent in all of the conversations. It's not something that gets avoided in any context, because even if it's not a part of the topic in its inception, it gets questioned into it. Like, well, with what you just talked about, it won't AI do X or won't AI do Y? The reality of AI right now is that there are three venture points from this that is covered to some degree in the conference itself. One is the unfamiliarity of what to do with it. Excuse me, my apologies. And that is beyond the simpleton usages of making unique images or making interesting context or do content development, or treating it as a bit of a toy. That's still very present. People just don't know what to do with it. They talk about its full value, but they don't know how to get from what it is to how do you make it do what you want. That's one aspect. The second aspect is the inundation into AI in its conceptual terms, for anything. Put some AI on that thing. Put that. Let's add and that buzzword mentality. Just throw it into anything and everything. And of course, vendors and product providers are throwing it in so that you feel like they're keeping up with the processes when there's nothing really about AI that they're using that they weren't currently doing. And if they are, it's just circumstantial. A lot of times, believe me, the platforms we use, they're just sprinkled with aspects, but not actual, like this is a transformational thing for AI. So that's the second way, is applying it to weird things, everything and weird things. And the third is the real progressive use of AI, making it do what is it capable of doing in a way that's helpful and useful at this point, and authentic and accurate. We already know from countless news articles that AI can be manipulated, basically by giving it contained data, structured data, unstructured data, but contained. AI is only going to give answers based on the data that's been given. If you give it inaccurate data to say, use this data, it's going to give you inaccurate interpretations and results and usages and everything. So we already know that exists. So how do we make things work in certain ways? Some of the topics that are if you look at the agenda items within, and I've talked to friends that were there that I've asked to debrief me as to how they felt about certain presentations and so forth. There was the whimsical way of looking at AI. I think one of the topics one day was the impact of AI on the customer journey. The peppering of the usages of AI, of creating content or understanding the guest by creating a persona of them, which is an interesting tangent, but hard to use, and if not spooky. And I'll tell you why. The idea of being able to help, say, your front desk person, that AI, from whatever way you structure it, looks at the data that it has about the guests coming in, and through it creates a highlight persona of what the front desk agent can use to engage with that guest. Things that make the guests feel like they are being remembered, or that they're being appreciated, that they like certain things in their room. We tried this, with fluffy versus soft pillow, or hard pillows, or extra towels, or things like this from an amenity request perspective. But this is a preemptive, predictive way of saying, hey, these people always ask for this stuff. just offer it first, or that we already took care of it. We already put extra towels in or whatever like that. That usages of AI where it can take some of the heavy lifting off of the front desk person who has hundreds potentially, and if you work in Vegas, thousands potentially of arrivals, of the logistics of taking that granular time and seeing what the guest is as an individual, which we always talk about, treating the guest as a guest of one. That's a potentially helpful thing. Until you get to the other conversation of that is how much of the data that is being given to this AI function has been permitted by the guest. Comes to a question. Some of the things were discussed that perhaps AI reaches out on LinkedIn and looks at the content of the person. If they're on LinkedIn, they take all the information that the person has publicly made on a platform, LinkedIn, and use it to do this interpretive persona, okay, how to speak with them and how to communicate with them and what to make sure that they have as services for the guests when they arrive at the front desk. But we begin to run into this, where is that a good thing and where is it a bad thing? It's hard to translate those kind of conversations into a way that at one point you may hit a guest that doesn't appreciate that doesn't like the fact that you've taken data that they put up for a different purpose and used it for what purpose you've designed it for. Hard to translate those two things. However, in the world of talking about this, you can begin to think about how can front desk team members leverage what available information is out there for them, that they can look at markers and draw to their own ability what they can do to improve their relationship with the guests at the front desk. That's kind of where I see AI coming into a good balance with its implications and implementation. Is it's making us ask questions by what we think we can try to do with AI into, well, what can we do to make the purpose of making AI do that actually work? How can we blend the technology availability of heavy lifting some things that we just don't have time as users, as humans to do, but it always be left to the human to interpret its usage. That's a critical component that I think, I'm not saying was ignored in the conference discussions, but I don't think it was leaned into as much as in future conversations might warrant, where we have to moderate our expectations of AI's value, AI's usefulness, okay, value and usefulness, almost the same, but contextually action versus awareness. And then the human intervention as to its value. That's one. The other infusions of conversations of AI, I think are helpful, and they touched on some of them in the topics conversations as to how can it involve and influence your group sales initiatives? How can it help you better understand the data you're getting? These all come with very heavy caveats because these are the aspirational desires of what we want AI to do. We want to do the HAL 2001 Space Odyssey computer, or the Star Trek computer. Hey, computer, what's the day going to look like today? Or what's the performance and so forth? And we've talked about on the show the 4 steps of data usages and so forth, up to the last step, which is the prescriptive. Taking the data, taking the reports, taking the understanding of the metrics of how they relate to each other, and prescribing solutions. That 4th step, that is the biggest step to take in the 4-step process of data and AI usage. And again, I would refer back to show number 452 as being the specific when we talked about the 4 steps of data usage and data creation and reporting and so forth. But prescriptive is a very hard leap because there's a trust factor as to the data's interpretation to the human user's decision model. And when you start talking about AI and optimizing your sales strategy, with the caveat, and I think it was touched on, but again, I think it would be leaned into more in future tense, the idea that having AI doing the time-consuming aggregation of data the same way the human person would do it, the same mathematical models, the same data sources, the same processes, but done much more efficiently with AI. And the results of that heavy lifting, ditch digging, plowing, okay, that is so time consuming for humans, allowing the economy of scale to then present the data in the format as an end result user decision based prescription that the human user, the salesperson, the revenue management person, the marketing person, the operations, the ownerships, the management teams, whatever, can look at to make the decisions based on their experience of understanding awareness. The pitfall of this in reverse is to rely too much on the result data as being the answer. And that, unfortunately, is a terrible thing based on diminished education of humans. I see memes all the time. What that I think is very funny being older is like, what part of, I wonder what the part of my brain that used to remember phone numbers is doing now. It's a funny analogy because we don't keep track of things like we used to keep track of things because we had to. Back in the day before we had, speed dial and what have you, and just calling the person's name and the phone does it for you. You had to remember people's phone numbers. And there was a lot of phone numbers because the more people you knew, the more phone numbers you had to keep, and of course, people's addresses and so forth. I even find it hard to remember very important phone numbers. Now, why am I bringing all this up? Because we as humans begin to rely upon the technologies that are presented in our daily lives. As hospitality people, I've been frustrated that people are losing the art of old school pen and paper math. I'm not trying to be like, well, we should be able to do it with number two pencils on lined paper and script. I'm talking about the idea of knowing how the math works, knowing how to do displacement analysis, knowing how to go over and create yield numbers, budget constraint calculations, cost factors, uh, simple usage of percentages and so forth. I'm using math as an example, but strategies related to discipline. I believe you have to continue to keep the educational curve going, inclusive of current technology, but always knowing how to work the technology because you understand what the technology is doing. Just relying that it's done in some magical little cloud way and that the result is what you have to trust, knowing how that's calculated so that if the lights go off, so to speak. I made the analogy many years ago in our shows as time has gone on about the crash kits we used to have in hotels, that we did have intermittent problems. And as we were transitioning from an in-house server system where all the data was on our computer sitting below our desk to a cloud-based information system in which the internet went out, we don't have the data about the very people that are in our hotel. We had crash kits. You always printed out the in-house report. You always printed out the arrivals report. Why? Because if the lights blinked out and the internet went off or the phone line communication, the modem went out, you still knew who was in house and you still knew who was coming in. You could still function. That meant that you know how the system worked. I find that a lot of people are in roles that they don't understand what the actual functions are that they rely upon for their job. So constant education and constant improvement of knowing your business and knowing your role and knowing your modalities of doing things is critical. And these conferences go a long way to keeping that moving forward, as long as they don't press taking on the newest shiny object and discarding anything that's relevantly useful in pursuit of the new thing. New happens, but new has to meld with how it's being done so that whatever is not being done well after those two meld gets discarded and turned into the artifacts of remember when we used to have phone lines, remember we used to have this. That's all great and good, as long as the newness is able to be incorporated in a way that is understood and used the way it's best suited for. Why I keep bringing this up about conferences, because conferences sometimes create starry-eyed anticipation of things to be coming up in the future. So much so it creates stagnation in the current. Like, let's not do anything right now because I think it was quoted, Stephanie, dear friend of ours on the show, quoted that, maybe all the things we're talking about today will be null 6 months from now because of AI. I think that's boisterous to say, and I'll tell her that in person when I get to talk to her next, which should be soon. It's not that it's not true, because the modality of how we do things could change quickly. But I think the excitement of thinking that that could actually happen is an overestimation of the speed in which things change. There's a willingness to change, but translating it into actually making the change is literally what the topic of today's show is about. Is that translating the conversation of what's being discussed in conferences to the reality of what you're doing in your hotel when you go back home. Night and day. the same POS terminal sitting in front of your same team, the same PMS terminal sitting in front of your same team, the same computers that you were going to replace a year ago but decided to wait are still sitting underneath the desks for everybody. The booking engine online is still the same. The tech stacks are still the same. The reporting processes and the modalities that you have are the same the day you left to the day you got back from the conference. And AI isn't going to magically walk in with a RoboDog and start redefining your processes. So saying that things get done and changed quickly in 6 months, fun to say, great for a smile. But the reality of it is we have transitory concerns of keeping up to scale with the education that's necessary to understand how to use the changes without losing the productivity of how things are being currently done. And I'm not saying that everything is perfectly being run right now. There's a ton of dysfunction in how we do things that new changes improves and helps by far. Just think of booking online versus the days you couldn't go back that far. That's amazing business industry changing world for everybody. But the idea that AI is going to fix it itself, do it itself, allow it to be done by itself, and to trust what it does by itself is not a reality. It's not a reality in 6 months. It's not a reality in the immediacy. I'm not saying that eventually we just won't get and follow our AI overlords to do whatever they want to. I'm making jokes about that, but the idea is that AI should be integrated into what we do when it's producing and helping and benefiting a product process and service that we can do better with its help than we can do without it. That goes into getting content in front of people. You've heard me say many times about websites. Websites are an expression of everything we think the guest wants to know about us, from our best assumptions of what's been asked of us and our best assumptions of what we think needs to be told of us and our best belief of what our search engines are requiring of us to be able to be discovered online. All of that is not as good as the guest telling us what they want. AI can help with that because through interactive capabilities where you're not acting like a human, but you are creating a communication capability for the guest to garner information with what data you have, okay, to get the answers that they want. And then it gets learned from so that the next person that's similar, if not the same than the person that asked those questions, it's easier and faster for them to get the same information because it's not being generated, it's being adapted from what was created before. AI can be incredibly helpful with that. I didn't see a lot of that progressive AI usage in the agenda items. Now, truth be told, agenda items are truly for the benefit of selling the conference. You have to have titles. When I was doing this, one of the biggest things about coming up with titles for presentations was that they had to show complexity of the topics you're taking, the freshness, that you're not ignoring the things that are currently new, even though they're useless. People want to know more about them from the perspective of a professional. And they have to be timely in the sense of how they compare against what other information is being presented out there by other conferences and other associations and other resources. So they have to have an edge to them. They have to have a sellability to them. And because of that, they oftentimes are not as relevantly helpful as they are sellable. I feel that there's a good mixture of how the conference schedule came out this year. They had to sell AI because that's the conversation topic. How it gets translated into the different functions, of course, was the what ifs and how abouts and futuristic maybes and everything else. So there has to be the starry eyed to it. But I felt that there was some interesting, good, rock solid core conversational items related to how you do business now. That it all isn't about wistful AI as it was, how do you handle your call centers? How are you creating a unified sales, marketing, and revenue management collaboration? Again, ironically, when I first started the show today, talking about how this has been a mantra for years, and we be a part of that process of reminding people or educating people that they needed to do it. Now it's much more the mainstream, but it's still not a complete adoption to everybody. But it's seen from this, okay, and COVID and lockdown exacerbated this into being a necessity because of costs of labor and so forth. There is the need to consolidate these resources. I think the conference agenda for HSMEI really kept that persistency to reminding people of that need. I think from that process, you get it as being a baseline. And I think that's a very strong point that HSMAI has been able to make over the years, being an ardent creator of it with them years and years ago to where it is now. I feel that that has been a progressive growth for them. Um, I think they're still hanging on to some tattered things, influencers. They had translated more into just influence, but influencers was such a buzzword a couple of years ago, 3, 4 years ago. How do you get influencers? How do you contract with them? How do you get people to join? So forth. Now it's tempered down because of the falsehoods that it's created, the lack of production it's not produced, the inaccuracies of it, so forth. The arc of it has now turned into influence is valuable, influence is important, influence creates voice, and it creates communication, and it creates the ability to spread the word. How you do that isn't just about the way it was perceived years ago. Find somebody with a lot of followers, give them lots of money, give them lots of free stuff, and they'll talk about you. That's long since diminished to a more pragmatic relationship approach that you yourself can do much more effectively as a business than as having to seek other people's audiences. I thought that was a good conversation that they had with it. I think them addressing the revenue relationship between food and beverage and meeting space and hotel operations is a long overdue conversation because it is such a key element to the success of differentiation between product, property, platform success between them and another hotel. You have investors looking to decide why here versus there. That relation between food and beverage and conferences versus brand and flag and hotel operations is a key component as to the value proposition of the investment that they're looking to get into. And I think it's long overdue that we start talking more about how the hotel isn't the tail wagging the dog for food and beverage, and food and beverage isn't just an ancillary revenue source that is based upon the hotel's success, but it's a symbiotic relationship that the restaurant has to have a value existence on its own in collaboration with the hotel. So I thought it was very good of them to have that as a topic item in their conference agenda items as well. And it's something that can be brought home today to your hotel. If you're operating your food and beverage outlet or outlets based on occupancy as to the staffing of them, you're doing it wrong. If you are basing your restaurant as the sole provider for food and beverage to your hotel patrons, you're doing it wrong. Because capture percentage is never 100%. People will regret doing business with you with your hotel if you try to corner them only to stay to eat at your dining facilities. They want to experience everything around you, inclusive of you. So they're ancillary. Nobody wants to go to a dead restaurant. Make it local, make it valuable. And in order to do that, you've got to stop treating it as a hotel restaurant. You have to treat it as a restaurant that's associated with a hotel. So that's a take home right now that you can do. That's a take home that you can go and look at and say, how can we change the dynamic that the restaurant can operate as if it has to survive on its own, not under just the benefit that the water, power, and cleaning and maintenance and everything is handled by the hotel as a cost. Yes, it's deferred down to the restaurant, and it's not, and it usually gets convoluted at that. But the restaurant has to run and thrive on its own. It has to be good enough to have a local crowd. It has to be good enough to be more than just the people that come down from upstairs. And that's coming from a food and beverage person. And literally having those arguments over the years and making those changes. It's something that has to get done. It's been lagged dormant for too long. Strangely enough, it's usually highly discussed in development proposals to ownership investors that there's this huge value proposition between restaurant and hotel that we want to provide it, and this is what we do, and all this. And then it gets lost. It gets handled as a hotel with the ancillary amenity of a restaurant attached to it. And it's a diminishment of the value that was pitched to these owners. So that is a take home that you can do right away from translating to being in discussion to conference. That how do I make changes in our hotel now to create a better relationship between a restaurant and a hotel and allow the restaurant to be more valuable beyond just the scope of its amenity value to the hotel. Very powerful for it. I love the idea that it tries to talk about the uniqueness of identifying independent hotels. I think it's underscored as to not promoting the idea of any hotel. It's easiest for independent hotels to create a personal persona or personalization of an independent hotel. That's literally one of the core existences of independent hotels is the uniqueness of just it. But I believe brand hotels are missing an opportunity as well. Brand hotels can have a culture that is acknowledged for whom they are as a property. Brand hotels can be more than just what their flag represents. and can be more than just what the flag does for them. Actually, to be fair, they can do a lot more for themselves than what they do that the brand does for them, because there's a gap point between the brand will always sell brand and the property is a unique property based on location, based on people, and all of that. Now you have more choices now to do things with that than you ever had in the history of hospitality, and not using it is a shame. And I think they could have expanded on the conversation as being more about all hotels developing personalization than just independent hotels, which is the easiest to develop personalization. So all in all, incredibly impressive that um, they've done the audience that they've done. I kind of feel personally proud of that, having been engaged with HSMEI for 20 some odd years anyway, and having been on the board and been the director of the marketing and so forth, that, from where it started and what was created, what we created back then, to where it has become and joined with and become. Obviously, many great people, long since after I stopped doing it, have created this catalyst of moving it forward, moving it farther, moving it bigger. Not trying to ride on the coattails, but I'm happy to have been part of the origin story of it, and to see it. I Over the years have been candidly cruel if I felt that the conferences were not holding up their promise of what they're supposed to be doing, and I feel that that was justified when I was doing it. I feel it's also equally justified by giving them praise this year, not just for their attendance records, that shows the ability to sell it, but also the fact that they are getting much more better at the content diversity and the integration of marketing and revenue, which has been a stalwart, soapbox topic for me for years, and sales. That communication and the collaboration, there's still much more to do and farther to go, because we have to include human resources and accounting, team members and life cycles and everything else. So there's more expansion of that concept that we have been touting for many years as well. But the fact that we have gotten to this point, that they have gotten to this point, and that they have this kind of diversity of content that is integrated between revenue management and marketing and sales, and is showing the relationships in a functional way, which was unheard of 4 or 5 years ago when we were still beating a drum about it, is a great tribute to the success of the team at HSMAI. So kudos to Julie and Jenny, Kristen, Kelly, all of them, Bob, for Jason, for all of those things. High tech, again, we'll talk a little bit more about the technology comes out, because next week will be fun, because more and more of the press release, product release, aha stuff that usually happens at high tech hits news media the following week. So we're going to hit some of the new progressive platform stuff. We're going to look at that and review that and see how to sift through some of that stuff a little bit and see how that has changed differently. One thing, Duetta was sold to an investment group. What does that mean? There's moving, shaking always, but always conferences are kind of a milestone into a larger sum of it happening and so forth. So we'll get a lot of people's feedbacks, a lot of info. I get a chance to talk to more of my team that was there to give me some insights as to more and more of what some of the things that they attended, more and more of what they were exposed to on the high tech floor and so forth. So we'll have those conversations as well. So thank you all so very much for watching us on TV, Hospitality Channel, our TV station. The show is always free. Thank you for the people that join me every week on the Hospitality Marketing Club as a peer group. If you want to join us and you're a hospitality marketer, you're more than welcome to. Just go to hospitalitymarketing.club, enter your email. I send you a quiz, because it's only for current hospitality marketing people. We're not here to do basic training or anything like this. We will help train or teach based on skill levels, but you have to be in the space doing hospitality marketing as a job. And if you pass the quiz, then you're part of our peer group, and you get to go over and have our live conversations and Q&As and feedbacks and resources and so forth available. For those of us that listen to our podcast on our 39 platforms, Hospitality Marketing Podcast, we'll cover some of the tools that we talked about high tech that came out that we already knew were going to come about. Some fun things that come out from it, integrations and so forth. But you can also listen to our radio station, hospitalityradio.com. And of course, if you want to catch all of our reruns of the show, past, now, and present, based on participant, date, broadcast, topic, and so forth, go to hospitalitychannel.tv. You'll see all of our shows there. And for all of our simulcast on Facebook and all of our associations, HSMI being one of them, we broadcast live on HSMI's platforms. And this is in support of HSMI, really. And we'd say that in our credits as well. We've been doing this for 10 years now. And we do this in support of HSMAI. Separate from them, we don't have any support. There's no financial things related to the show. This is a desire for good content that's unbiased, or at least not influenced by sponsorships, biased by opinions sometimes. And we're also on Facebook for all of those, as I mentioned, YouTube channels for associations and corporations that we're a part of and so forth. Thank you for always broadcasting us on that. And of course, places like Twitch, if you use your gaming console, LinkedIn, X, yeah, a lot of them. And then again, our TV channel as always. So with that, I'll tell you everywhere we've been at, everywhere you can find us. If you have any questions, you can always send me an email, Loren at hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. And I reply to each and every email about the live show and the podcast. So my questions, feedback, whatever, please do. And until next week, I think we'll be in France, in Paris, just prior to the Olympics. So we'll be over there broadcasting. But until then, my name is Loren Gray. Thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you next week.